And I had one moment, I suppose you could call it, as people often talk about defining moments, and mine would seem to have an unpromising aura to it, which was that I was given a bit part in a production of Cry the Beloved Country. Does that play mean anything to you? It's set in South Africa.
Yeah, it was a play about the horrors of apartheid.
That's exactly right, yeah, you got it. And I was cast as a little black boy. Because, of course, woe betide that there should be any black children in this school. Or if they were hidden away in the East Wing or something. And so I had a tiny little T-shirt and a pair of skimpy shorts, and that meant that I had to cover my body in makeup and my face and wear a little wig. And the thing that I really loved about this, for that 2 hours a night, you walked onto a place that was flooded with light in an otherwise dark world, and it was as simple as that. Even from the very beginning, working in the theatre, I understood certain things about myself, and again, I'm very grateful for that, because it's not invariably true that you understand what it is that you need at an early stage, because there's so much. You're impelled to do so many things that go against the grain very often. Mm-hmm. You know it's going to be a tough life, and from my point of view, I assumed I was going to have a life in the theatre, because very few English actors at that time were getting a chance in movies. Much as I loved films, it never really occurred to me that that would be a part of my life. We all really thought we were going to work in the theatre and maybe do a bit of TV to pay the bills now and then. And the theatre world is very different. You know, the theatre world is not, it's, you know, you may, I suppose, gain some recognition, but it's just not, it's not in the same, you know what I'm talking about, it's not to the same degree.
Well, but also in the theatre world, you go out and you play to 800 people.
Right.
Or 900 people a night. Here, a movie goes out and it's 10 million
and you're that big to most of them as well. Yeah. If they've got the cheap seats, you're like,
that's right.
Is that they need binoculars to see who you are? So, you know, and that was my early years were spent working in the theatre. I knew that the capacity to do this work was something that was a delicate thing. Whatever it was at one's very core that led one to do this work, I knew that it was not indestructible, and that if I kept putting myself in situations that made me uneasy, which could be doing work that I didn't believe in, even when I didn't have a choice in the matter, or having to hawk myself around, even auditions, this sounds like horribly arrogant, but open auditions. I did a couple of those for the RSC and the National, where you sit in a room with 50 other miserable actors working on a piece of Shakespeare, and then you walk into a room, there's 7 men all puffed up with self-importance, and you know, you strut around and they look at you like a specimen of some kind. And I ended up working for the Royal Shakespeare Company. I don't know what I was thinking of, but I was seduced. It was one of those moments I made a mistake, because I had the right nose for classical theatre, so they were always trying to kind of throw a cloak around me, and you know, we did this thing called the small-scale tour, and the notion is, and it's not a bad thing, that you pack a theatre. It's a dismantleable theatre that you pack into lorries, trucks, and you carry it around to all the places where they're starved of Shakespeare. But for the most part, they're starved of it because they actually don't want anything to do with it. They're perfectly happy to be fed something else.
They're starved,
but we're going to give them Shakespeare whether they like it or not. So.
They're starved by choice, as a matter of fact, by choice, yeah.
So throughout one bleak, miserable winter, from these out-of-season seaside resorts, you know what they're like, with the kind of doors banging in the wind and all kind of rusty merry-go-rounds and stuff, and like 10 old-age pensioners with the hearing aids whistling in the audience. And my apologies to anyone with a hearing aid, but worse than that, the costume designer on this, I don't know what they were on, but they thought, you know, we want to make these guys young and sexy, so they they designed this outfit. I mean, I can't begin to describe it, but it was kind of like leather chaps, which were sort of cut off from the upper thigh. And then we had to wear some kind of codpiece in our tights. You might as well have had like a neon sign pointed at your crotch. And we do schools matinees as part of the fun. And they were pretty tough towns, some of these places, like the industrial Midlands in England. I mean, if they're not throwing stones at other people's windows, they're going to see Romeo and Juliet. So you walk on stage and you have to wait for 10 minutes for them to stop laughing before you can even get a word out. So at the end of 4 months of this, when I really felt I'd had enough Shakespeare to last 9 incarnations, I was summoned by these directors who had never bothered to come and say hello during the whole tour, because they don't speak to each other because they're all terrified of each other's works. They're so absolutely overblown with self-importance and terrified that the next man's going to do a production more successful than theirs. So I walk into a room and sure enough, there's those 7 fellas sitting behind the desk. And there's one chair on the other side of it. And one of them pipes up. And he'd kind of been okay at one time or another, but he seemed to have caught the disease with the rest of them. And he said, "So we want to talk about your future with the Royal Shakespeare Company." I said, "You really don't understand. I came here out of respect." I said, "But I have no future at the Royal Shakespeare Company." I said, "Oh, well, we understand. Maybe there's some film offers sort of luring you away," because a film is the great evil, you see. In England, when I was coming up, it was like the only thing that was going to lure you away from the only honorable course as an actor was film. They were going to sling all kinds of money at you, and you were going to invest yourself in an inferior art form.
Like a Faustian bargain.
You see, a Faustian. You see, by this time, they didn't understand, because I'd seen Mean Streets, and I'd seen A Place in the Sun, and From Here to Eternity, and Giant, and I'd seen On the Waterfront. And, you know, although that world wasn't available to me, I thought, well, there is something that one could contribute to, if only. And I said, "Listen, I got to tell you, lads," I said, "Here's the thing. I'm going to be unemployed when I leave this room, and I don't know how long I'm going to be unemployed for. But for however long it is, I would rather be unemployed than work with any of you people sitting here." And that was the end of that.
There is a famous story, I would have thought was apocryphal, but I know it's not, that I'm sure you've heard, that Laurence Olivier, in his older years, he made a film called Marathon Man. And he showed up one day, and there's Dustin. Dustin is the quintessential American actor, but also the New York kind of ethnic actor. And he just looks ghastly. And, you know, and so Laurence looks at me, I'm like, "My dear boy, my God, what happened to you? I feel so bad for you." And Dustin goes, "Well, you know, I haven't slept for 4 days, and I didn't change my clothes, and I didn't take a shower." Because he said, why not? It's the part. I have to live the part. And Olivier steps back and looks at him and says, "My dear boy, why don't you try acting? It's so much easier." Now, Joan Plowright told me that story, so I think it's true.
Now, can I tell you what I feel about that story?
Yes, yeah, I would love to hear that.
Without any disrespect either to Olivier or Joan Plowright, but I think it says more about what Olivier failed to understand about the process of certainly film acting, if you can divide the two, than about Hoffman's process by which he worked. And he could equally well have said that same thing to Montgomery Clift, to James Dean, to Marlon Brando, to Robert De Niro, to Duval, and so on and so forth. But he's missing the point there. He's just missing the point. And my feeling is probably the greatest film actor of that period of time that came from that place was Charles Laughton. And Charles Laughton had something quite remarkable. I don't know how you would ever describe it, but I think he was probably, in himself as a man, I don't know this for sure, but I think he probably was quite a complicated man. But his generosity as an actor he fed himself into that work. He fed himself into that work. He didn't stand back from it. He didn't make a beautiful sound. He certainly didn't make a beautiful picture.
Yeah.
But as an actor, you cannot take your eyes off him.
You developed an appreciation, an approach to acting that is what would have been called an American approach, which is that you immerse yourself in who it is and you do the work that you have to do to create that person.
That would have been true probably of most of my contemporaries at theatre school. It was a great school. It was mostly, it was a school that they thought they were preparing us for a life in the theatre. But there's no difference. The work is the same. It's the same work that you do. And I had a truly remarkable teacher there who passed away a few years ago, called Rudy Shelley, who was an Eastern European Jew who'd been a refugee and began his life as a dancer, but had developed, I hate the word system, a way of working, which was largely based on Stanislavski. I think probably very few people are able to teach Stanislavski in a way that it's comprehensible. But Rudy was one of them. And Stanislavski, of course, is the forefather of the method, and that's probably where the connection is. And, you know, so the combination of that work with Stanislavski and also the fact that we were all looking at Mean Streets.
Yes.
And we all saw Taxi Driver 6 times the first week it came out. And we were all looking at those, you know, the wonderful films that had... that I mentioned, you know, Clift particularly for me was somebody I was fascinated by, and Brando, of course, who was the god of all of them. But R.I.P.
Yeah. You had lived for years, actually, with Scorsese as a kind of distant persona.
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah.
And he was a sort of hero, I think, for you.
Oh, yeah.
Someone.
Yeah, and De Niro, too. Both of them.
So when you did Age of Innocence, which is when you first worked with Marty,
Yeah.
do you remember your first impressions when you met Marty for the first time?
Just want to pick him up and cuddle him.
Now, and luckily, Marty is of a height where you could do that, actually. And so how did he react when you cuddled him?
He's just, is he not the most accessible man that you ever met in your life? I mean, probably to the point where he could almost make himself ill with accessibility. And that is a great lesson to learn from a master. You know, working with a master. And I don't use that word lightly. There are very few of them. And he's one of them. And he remains, as yet, God knows why, he remains unrecognized in this country. But,
Marty is revered here.
Well, he is by those that revere him. But unfortunately, some people seem to miss the point. Yeah. But I don't ask me how.
Okay, but I mean...
I'm not just talking about Academy Awards. That would cheapen him to talk in that respect. But he's... But some people don't understand that he puts his very soul into the work that he's doing. That for him it is a calling. If you're going to work in a creative field of any kind, you give yourself over to that. Mm-hmm. You give yourself over to, otherwise do something else. That's what he did. He gives himself into that work. Everything. It's his life and the work that he does. Those two things are part of each other. And I was just going to say that to meet a master who remains so open and vulnerable to every encounter, I mean, that is a remarkable thing. Probably the most attractive thing about a great man or a great woman that you could ever, that lack of self-importance. And in a few very rare cases, I've met that in my life, and it's made its mark perhaps more deeply than anything else. And it was true of my father-in-law as well. He was a man who was incapable of self-importance. And for a man of that stature to conduct himself in that way is, if you're lucky enough to have that lesson laid before you, then you're doing okay.
I read that after you had done, I think it was The Boxer, that you retired from film and you went to Italy, and that you spent years working as a carpenter and as a cobbler. Did I get that right?
My lips are sealed.
But then what I read was that Marty wanted you to come back here because he wanted you desperately for Gangs of New York. And Marty told me this. He said Leo and I had a way to bring him back to New York. Is that true?
I can't, well, well, I did get here, so I guess they must have done, but I can't remember what it was. But, you know, he's doing himself a disservice, quite honestly, because Martin is a mighty man, and you don't circumnavigate him. You know, if he asks you to do something, the tendency is that you want to do it. And you know, I wanted to meet him and talk to him about this face-on, not just have a phone conversation about it. And he'd already told me the story on the phone by then, and you know, he had his hooks in me before I came over to meet him. But the thing that I most needed to know wasn't really, he didn't need to convince me. No one ever needs to convince me of anything. In fact, if a director starts trying to convince you, they're really barking up the wrong tree.
Yeah.
They should look for somebody else. They shouldn't have to convince anybody. I just needed to know, because I've been out of the game for a while, for my sake, I suppose, firstly, but also for his, whether halfway through the shoot I'd be looking for the escape hatch, because I knew it was going to be a long haul. And it was just hard to reach the moment where I thought, yeah, I think I can go through with this. I can go through with this.
That was a long shoot, Gangs of New York.
Yeah, it was long, yeah.
When you were in the process of this shoot, was there ever a moment when this misgiving resurfaced? Did you ever stop and just say to yourself, I'm not sure I can do this?
I think it was usually around 3 o'clock every afternoon.
On a regular basis, then. But it's an extraordinary character that you made there.
You never know. You see, you just never know. I mean, if you're doing the work, how to put it? If you think you know, then something's not quite right. You cannot tell. And I suppose the further out on a limb you are, the further there is to fall. And that sense of precariousness is something that you have to live with, and you better get used to it. Because if you don't feel it, then you're missing something. But it's hard to live with it every day for 8 months.
Is there anything attractive about that sense of precariousness? Some people, I think, would say it's even addictive.
Yeah, it's invigorating. Not always, but the work, you see, the work itself brings you back. These are moments we're talking about, moments of almost obliterating self-doubt, which every single person on the cast and crew, you see people disappearing into the shadows on any given day. And you see them, you see the core of them melting. And I've seen some of the most talented people I ever met stopped in their tracks, paralyzed by that sense of doubt. But it's a balancing act.
Does it ever go away?
I doubt it.
But it hasn't gone away for you.
No.
Is there one there that you can say, no, I am proud of that. I think I nailed that. I think I did a good job for them.
I'm a bit of a nitpicker, quite honestly, and...
Never would have guessed that.
You know, I suppose in that kind of... You know, it gives you the lash to go on a little bit, you know, when you begin to sort of hobble on the, you know, on the path forwards now and then. It gives you a lash to get a glimpse, even just a glimpse of something that you felt okay about some time before. And of course, you feel you're in a kind of living in a graveland of missed opportunities. And that's part of the beauty of the work, is that you're working within imperfection the whole time. And of course, everybody's impetus is to try and achieve that impossible thing. On a film, you've got maybe 100 people on a small crew, actors and technicians, who all somehow have to have the single-mindedness as individuals and the like-mindedness as a group to achieve that thing, moment to moment. And that includes the post-production, the editing, and so on. So many things have to go right. Making a film is a difficult thing, and making a good film is nigh on impossible. Yeah. And so, of course, you tend to look back on stuff and see the things that might have been rather than what was.
Do you do that a lot?
No. It's too depressing.
I was hoping you would say that. You've made very specific selections. You've turned down at least 24 films that I know about, and I won't even go into those films because there's no point in it. But they say, who should we get? Well, if Daniel Day-Lewis would, he doesn't do much.
You can't make a career out of turning down films.
But you know what you can do? You can make a life. You can make a life in which you feel you've controlled your destiny. And very few actors can say that.
Truly, and I mean, there have been opportunities that I recognized fully as being powerful ones, with people that I would, in any circumstances, have loved to work with. But you cannot account for this strange appetite that reveals itself from time to time for something completely unanticipated. And I never know where that appetite is going to come from or what it is going to be for. But you can only ever, and that's one of the things I learned again at a very early age, to just do this thing. If I have to do this thing without truly needing to do it, I should work at something else. And I do believe that, and it's true. I mean, it's easy to say this because, you know, you're an actor, that's your job to act. And for a lot of people, it's not just, you know, it's presumptuous to assume you can pick and choose and, you know, and you make do, you can pay the bills. For some people, they really need to pay those bills, and they're going to accept work if needs be, that they don't have, their heart and soul isn't in it. And fair play to them, you know, you can't belittle that. But I have been privileged enough somehow, and I can live on very little money and have in the past. But I've been lucky enough to, with very few exceptions, only do things that I've felt this irresistible appetite for. And when I see these opportunities, which to everybody else might seem God-given, if I don't share the madness of that person that's doing that thing, then I'm the wrong man for them. I'd rather recommend somebody else for them, because you've got to have the same madness as that person at that time.
I'm not only grateful that you did this for me, but you shared so much that was very personal and very precious and very private.
Well, let me tell you something. I don't often, as you know, I don't often do interviews, and especially when I'm not working, I tend really never to do them. But we've talked a few times over the years, and it's quite a rare thing to be able to talk to somebody that has that feeling, that ability to conduct an interview in such a wonderfully engaging way. So thank you for that.
Thank you. Thank you.
See, the great thing about me, Rich, is that I'm almost invariably at a loose end. So, and unfortunately, he passed away a few years ago, but I only ever had one agent when I began with as a kid, and if ever I could get him on the phone, which wasn't often, he used to say to me, you know, dear boy, he said, your greatest asset is your availability. So I'm glad you capitalized on my...